Oh, and 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So it's interesting that as I get ready here, that our our Revelation portion mentions about the son of David, but most of today's will be spent talking about Joseph and how he is foreshadowing of Yeshua. And I know this past few weeks, we've been spending a lot of time on Joseph and who else hiding behind, I know. uh, but it's good that we spend this time so that every year we're reminded of who Joseph was and how Joseph was a foreshadowing of Yeshua. And some of the questions I have today, you can go ahead and put them up there. Anyway, and you'll notice that I called this Joseph Faith in Every Situation, and which is something I'm hoping that we'll learn a little more of today. So one of the questions I hope to help us answer today is how do we see faith shown in Jacob? The second one, how do we see the same faith shown in Joseph? The third one, is it that Elohim does not have power over a burned body? Obviously, we'll spend a little bit of time with that because I know that's very much something that's becoming amongst even people who claim to be believers, that it's okay to be burned. The other one, what do we show to a watching world when we choose to have our remains placed in a casket over an urn? As well, is there a time when you cannot use a casket over an urn? Why does both Jacob and Joseph choose to be buried in the promised land at the proper time? You'll see a little bit why as we go through it. That's why I mentioned that. What is the final prophecy of Joseph that he gives to his family? What are the brothers of Joseph showing when concocting a story after the death of Jacob? So we know at that time that, and even today, we know that Elohim has said it is appointed once for all to die whom he has determined. Because when Yeshua does come, there will be those he will choose to keep alive. We don't know who that is. So then, if you guys noticed that in one of our previous studies, we talked about how it looks like Jacob already died. So then, of course, the question is, how can Jacob seemingly die twice? So we have a couple of different things possibly going on here. And I think both of them you can make an argument for both, that they could fit the context. I will talk a little bit more of the one that I think has a little more, shall we say, logic, is a little more valid than the other one. So, because if we see here, so it looks that at the end of chapter 47 is the first time that Jacob seems to talk about his death when he's going to lie on the head of his bed. Could also be a staff, depending on your translation. But again, the point is he was laying on something. Something was supporting him. I won't spend too much time on whether it was a bed or whether it was a staff. So Israel bows himself on the head of his bed as though he died, and in the Hebrew language, this is the wording for those of you who can read it. Then how could Jacob die again at the end of chapter 49? So I think we have two options, and I'm going to talk a little bit about creation. By Moses in our book of Genesis, that would fit the wording of both contexts. One could be that the writing is not in chronological order. And we should kind of expect that a little bit in the scriptures, because the reality is it's not always the case. But then, does that mean God's just kind of random about stuff? Or is there a reason so we can explain why he wrote it that way? You can go ahead and put up the picture. I have a picture there of that one, which I'll be spending a little bit of time on. So, yeah, go back. Don't go to back that one yet. That one's good. Thank you. Some of the details are mentioned in chapter 2. So this is, when it comes to creation, the first one is all about how God created the heavens and the earth. Chapter 2, we see that he gives the Sabbath, and that we know that in Mark 2:27, Yeshua said that he is the Lord of the Sabbath. Of course, we know that came because people were questioning, well, why are you letting your disciples do this? Why are you letting them do that? So in the second chapter of creation, so chapter 2, it's now it's focusing on the people, because we see that he gives more details of how, you could go back to the questions there, Lois. He gives more details on how he created. And he says that when he created, he took the dust and he formed man and he breathed into him the breath of life. So then logically, we can see now that the reason that he's writing it has changed. It's now gone to humans are now what's important, more than how God created. Because we know that on this sixth day, God created Adam and Hava. So now in chapter 3, we see the fall. So we see here that there was the first reason, chapter 1, here's how he created it. Chapter 2, this is what it's going to focus on humans, because they are his most, you could say, magnificent creation that he made. So that's why, hope that explains a little bit why it's not in chronological order. Otherwise, it doesn't, if you piece things together, you can see that how God really did it all. But you can also explain to someone why, if they're reading it at first glance, it doesn't make sense. God knows everything. Why doesn't he just put it all in the right order? Because he has the authority to do that. He doesn't always have to do it the way we as humans want him to do it. So then if we go back to our portion in Jacob, and as I was saying in chapter 47 there at the end, where he's now laying on his bed, this does some have credibility to it, as it seems as though Moses writes it with Jacob's focus being on adopting and blessing the sons of Joseph, who have an Egyptian Gentile mother. So you can see, so Moses is writing this about Joseph's sons because now they're about to become family. So then you can see that he would obviously, Jacob would have spent a lot of energy in that. And the second one is now he's going to bless all of his sons. So you can see why maybe chronologically he doesn't have to put it in order, because the first time he's writing to the sons of Joseph and Joseph. The second time we notice that he includes all of his children. So he would now want to give a blessing on them. But if we look closely, we notice that at the end of 47 there, because of the time he spent and because it says that Joseph at the beginning heard, if we go back to the beginning of the chapter, he heard that his father was sick. And you know your father's old. So if you hear your father's sick, you're going to rush there to see him because that might be it. You don't know how much longer he has. So what are you going to do? If you have kids, you're going to take your kids with you. You're going to take, your wife with you too. And so maybe Jacob lost some of his strength because he's sick. Now he's taking his two sons. He's also blind. And that's why it does talk about that in the text. And so now that could be why he lays either on his staff or his bed. Because if we go on, in the next chapter, we see that he actually does say at the end, after going through all his children, which we read today, he talks about how he said that he is about to die. He didn't say that in the previous chapter. And we know that shortly after that in chapter 50, it starts with, seeing as Jacob is sick before blessing the sons of Joseph, that could be that maybe Jacob had spent most of his energy adopting and blessing the children of Joseph. So that's the first one. Then we go down. So Joseph at the beginning of chapter 50 now does say that he cries on his father who had just passed away. So seeing as we spent some time on this Joseph and the confusion with Jacob seemingly dying twice, let's look at another question. Another question that would come up would be, if you're an Egyptian or a Gentile who's trying to figure this out, now all of a sudden you're wondering, okay, why is it so important that Joseph take his father to be buried in the land of Canaan? Because we know Egypt had many gods. We know they had their own gods. That's why eventually in the book of Exodus, we'll see that God destroys them. So they had this idea that, there was a life. They had their own understanding. So now Joseph, who they clearly respected, and why did Jacob insist that he be buried by Joseph, his son, our second in command in Canaan? Why did Joseph make Jacob a vow to bury Jacob in Canaan? Why was Joseph so intent on keeping his father's wishes? Why near the end of the chapter and book does Joseph make his family take a vow that he too should be buried in Canaan after Elohim frees them from Egypt? The clear answer is in the fact that Jacob wanted to be buried in the same field as his grandparents and parents. This no one could deny, because they were all going up now at this time to do it. If we go back to that picture again, if you want to pull it up, Lois, thank you. We see there that, and Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went up all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his house, and all the elders of the land of Egypt. And notice it happened right away. Pharaoh didn't even consider it for a little while. He's like, well, maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. He's just like, no, I can't go, but those who have places of authority, they will go on my behalf. So we'll see the picture later. It would have been a huge entourage, because that's why even the leaders of Canaan were like, wow, look at all these Egyptians. They knew who they were, because Egypt at the time was, the most powerful nation in the world. And, which we'll talk a little more later, they were the only nation that had food. Everyone who wanted food had to go to Egypt during the famine to get it. So, in our text, we see after, let's keep going here. They could come to one conclusion. Jacob, Joseph, and all of the family believed that they must keep the promise to Jacob and their Elohim, the Elohim of Israel. They would have also shown to Egypt that there is a life after death, as far as the Hebrews are concerned. And when I live for eternity, I would want to live where my Elohim lives. It would have also shown the Egyptians that the Elohim of Israel gave the land of Canaan to them. Their actions would have shown as well, Egypt, that they honored another. In the Egyptian case, it would be a small god, but they honored another, this God. This action would have told Egypt that the beautiful land in Goshen was not their lasting home. So because they already knew that Israel was given the land in Goshen, and that's where they had their cattle. So how many of the Egyptians at this time might have come to hold some type of respect to the Elohim of Israel? We do not know. We can ascertain a little from our context, though, as we read today, is that all of Egypt had a great deal of respect for Joseph. He provided for them during the years of drought and treated them with dignity. He allowed them food to plant their crops with the exchange that they would give 1/5 to Pharaoh. The rest they would keep for themselves. Sorry, this was in the last week's, but we weren't here last week, so I'll keep going. The land that the priests of Egypt owned stayed under their control and were paid out of the Egyptian coffers. Pharaoh allowed some of the Hebrew men to care for his livestock. The people of Israel were increasing their wealth during the years of famine. This reality would have caused some to come to have some type of respect for Joseph and the Elohim he served, as they would have heard how the land of Goshen was still prospering. Pharaoh immediately sent all of his dignitaries on his behalf alongside Joseph and his family because of the respect Pharaoh had for Joseph. So we know that during this time, Israel was still acquiring money, was still acquiring wealth, even while the rest of the world at the time was suffering under the famine, because we know that even the people themselves were willing to sell themselves because they needed food to eat. So they go to Joseph. Joseph is the one they had to see because Pharaoh was the one who put Joseph in charge of the food. So as we go on here, the other question, you can go back to the questions there, Lois, is what do we show to a watching world when we choose to have our remains placed in a casket over an urn? And we just learned that their father Jacob had passed away. Now, the other question that would come up at this point would be, as you're going through it, why did they come up with a plan to concoct the story to try and trick Joseph into giving them and treating them well? And as it says in the text there, 50 verses 15 to 17, and when Joseph's brethren saw that their father was dead, they said, peradventure Joseph will certainly acquit us all the evil which we did unto him. And they sent a messenger unto Joseph, saying, thy father did command before he died, saying, so shall ye say unto Joseph, forgive, I pray thee now, the trespass of thy brethren, and their sin, for they did unto thee evil. And now we pray thee, forgive the trespass of the servants of the God of thy father. And Joseph wept when they spake unto him. Now, Joseph, again, his tears were, again, tears of sadness, but a different kind of sadness, because clearly they had not understood what Joseph already did for them. He had already blessed them in the land. this beautiful land. He was taking care of them. All of us would feel a bit sad if somebody kept coming up to us and be like, oh, please don't do this to me. And we were like, no, I've already dealt with it. And we noticed that Joseph's response is to them there's three different responses he gives. The first one is that he is not in the place of Elohim. 2, Elohim meant it unto good. And 3, that he would spare many people. He then comforts them by the promising that he will nourish them and their little ones in the land. How can you keep such faith in Elohim? Because you learn to trust him in every situation. We know that even before this, the brothers were not very nice to him. And so we see then that our actions show to a watching world what we're about. And regarding the urn, I know that those of you who've heard of Roger and those of you realize that there are situations where people are burned. And if they believe in Yeshua, we're not they're still going to be with him, because clearly the question here isn't, does Elohim have the power to bring them back if they're burned? Clearly he does. But the question is, as we're seeing here today, what does that show when you choose, as much as is possible with you, unless something happens, that you would rather be placed in a casket? We'll keep talking about that a little more. But in the case of Roger, those of you who maybe know and don't know, his family, his son was a pilot, and he owned a business teaching people how to fly. And a couple of people, they decided that they wanted to get rid of themselves. And this guy, the one person, he was learning how to fly, so he knew how to fly a plane. And he went in and sabotaged the airplane. And unfortunately, this young family, all 4 of them, because the whole family was together in the plane, it crashed and the whole plane burned. So you're going to tell me that because they burned, they're not saved? No, of course they're still saved. They're still going to be with him. So there are other situations as well where we experienced where the person chose to just finish essentially the burning because the person was burned so bad. There was really nothing left to place in a casket. So I just want to tell you that it's just, but in our choosing to, like I say, if we can choose a casket, should we die before he comes, that shows to a world the respect that we have for life because God did create the body. So, now, in our Zechariah portion, we notice that it talks about how Yeshua came and what he did this time when he comes. That he will split them out of olives, and that the people, he will free some from death. He'll free some from destruction. And he's coming as a warrior at this time. He's not coming as the lamb to just come and die. He's coming as the king. And so, but I want us, and I put up here some kind of connections between what we see in Joseph. I'll read them to you. Joseph and Yeshua. So Joseph as Joseph brought comfort to his people, Yeshua will also bring comfort to his people. Yeshua will save those dwelling in Jerusalem and become king over the whole earth. Joseph was used to save many people from dying, so Yeshua will save many from death. Joseph brought comfort, next one, as Joseph was suffered to come to power over all the people of the earth. Yeshua, who also suffered, will later be given power over all the earth. The differences, however, there are some, and I talked about those too. Joseph had power for a short time on this earth. Yeshua will have power for all the ages. Joseph brought relief by storing up grain for all the earth. Yeshua will save by going to battle against all the people. Joseph brought comfort by nourishing them in the land of Goshen. Yeshua will comfort them by sustaining them in the land he promised for all eternity. Joseph forgave his brothers who represent Israel and now includes Ephraim and Manasseh. Yeshua brings salvation to all who are part of Israel through faith in him. And though Joseph did not reprimand anyone for what the scriptures say, clearly Yeshua, as King of Kings, has the right to discipline any who are not obedient. As Zechariah 14, verse 17 says, "And it shall be that whoso will not come up all of the families of the earth unto Jerusalem to worship the King, Yodevave of hosts, even upon them shall be no rain." Now, the other question then is, why does Yeshua have this? Why is he given this ability? Why is he given this? Was he able to make these decisions? So in Zechariah, as we just talked about, we also see in David's Psalms 22. If you want to turn to it there, you can, but I'll just tell you quickly a vivid description of how Yeshua would die. And it's interesting, all the details, if you go through there, even in today's portion that we looked at in Luke 23, 13 to 34. It's almost as if there's a lot of like quoting almost what David had already said in Psalm 22 about the death of Yeshua. Sorry, and Luke 23 here records. So we clearly see Yeshua acting as Ben Yosef, who it was promised that he would be. The same Yosef forgave his brothers, talk more about that later, but anyway, forgave his brothers of their sins against him, who was sold as a slave and thrown into a pit twice. The brothers sold Joseph just as Judas Iscariot sold Yeshua. The majority of the Jews participated by crying, "Crucify him," and the Gentiles crucified him. So let's be clear. Both were involved. I know a lot of, even some believers out there, want to blame Israel and the Jews for everything bad that happened to Jesus or to Yeshua. That's why the whole thing with Hitler was able to do what he did because of how they saw the Jews. So not much has changed. And in Luke 23:34, foreshadowing of Yeshua, Joseph, as he forgave his brothers, here we see Yeshua forgiving those who knew not what they do, as he said in verse 34 there. Then you said, Yeshua, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And they parted his raiment and cast lots. And in Joseph's case, though, we see that he says to his brothers, am I in the place of God? And reminds them of what they meant for bad, Elohim meant it for good, so that he could save many. And as Joseph saved many, Yeshua saved many more, which had to happen before he could fulfill what Zechariah prophesies. So now, in Zechariah's vision, we notice that Yeshua comes back as a warrior, defeating the foes of Israel and rescuing others who might have died. We see here now the connection between Yeshua and Joseph, who are ruling over the whole earth, with Yeshua regardless of plenty and famine. So Yeshua will rule regardless of plenty and famine, while Joseph ruled over the whole earth and during a time of famine. And it's interesting, too, to notice that in the case of Joseph, Pharaoh gives Joseph the power. And in the case of Yeshua, he also talks about his father giving him the power and seated next to the right hand. So we always see this connection of even those who have power are given it by one who has more power. But in the case of Yeshua, that's a little bit harder to explain because we know that sometimes he talks about himself being one with the Father. And so because of this, Yeshua will send famine on those who are disobedient. And why can he do this? Clearly, Joseph didn't. Joseph just gives them the food that they need. But in the case with Yeshua, there'll be those who will continue to disobey him. And if we were to go on in Zechariah, you would see that those who don't keep Sukkot, he will send the famine on, regardless of where they come from. So why will Yeshua have the power to do this? In his death brought us life by taking our punishment. He forgives us of our sins against him when he asked the Father to forgive them, for they know not what they do. He takes the punishment of all those who would believe in him as their Savior, both Jew and Gentile. And this is my opinion on this matter. Just going to throw this out there. Because Yeshua, the Son, who has no beginning and end, suffered the punishment that was deserved by all humanity. For all humanity wants some way to exist for all eternity. And we know that's the case. People are doing whatever to keep themselves younger. They're doing whatever. There's even technology now where you can clone yourself. You know, that's the reason they do that is because they want to believe that they can live a longer life. They're not satisfied with the life that they have. But we know that in the case of Adam and Hava, if they had continued to be obedient, I believe, like I say, take it or leave it, it's fine. I believe that Elohim would have continued to sustain them. And they would have lived a lot longer than they did. So then when Adam and Hava fell, Yeshua, when he comes to die, because he's talked about, and rise again, being an eternal being, would have suffered for all humanity. And therefore, those of us who believe in him, we get to be with him. So when it comes to this idea of in the Revelation where it talks about living for eternity, I believe that's some to death, or in other words, separation from anything good. Some to life, union with all that is life, which is Yeshua. So, as far as it concerned me, Joseph is one of the closest foreshadowings of Yeshua. Because though some people may not see it as I do, and I do know that there's rabbis who have a hard time with this, but my question would be for them is what do they believe about Yeshua? That in the end will affect their decision. Because clearly Yeshua suffered willingly, just like Joseph suffered willingly. Yeshua died willingly. We know Joseph didn't. So, and Joseph was willing to go through all of these things and never say, try and fight back. He was willing to trust God, just like we know Yeshua was willing to trust in his Father, who would raise him up. And we know that, so we can see here in the story of Joseph, he had faith in Elohim. We too should choose to be buried in a casket showing our faith in the Elohim of Israel and respect of the body Elohim created to all around us. As Joseph says in Genesis 50, verse 25, and Joseph took an oath of the children of Israel, saying, Elohim will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from hence. And we know this happened because we've read about it It's interesting. I will mention this about David. So the difference with what we read today about he's also the son of David because he's coming back as a warrior. And we know David was a man of war because that's even why God tells David, who wanted to build him a physical building, but he wasn't allowed to, not because he didn't believe in God, but because he was a man of war. And so Solomon built it. So we see here Yeshua coming back, and he will fight. Those of us who believe in him will be there with him when he comes back, but he will be doing the battle for us. Garrett?